welcome first to everyone. But Bruce, I guess first things first, what is a copyist and how does that work here?
So at the National Gallery of Art, I didn't think I had the caliber to start to do any copies because my portfolio of paintings was so limited and the skill set just wasn't there. I was drawing pretty good, but a close friend and colleague, and actually finally became my mentor, said, Bruce, your drawing is getting better, it's getting pretty good. He said, if you really want to get good, then you should consider copying at the National Gallery of Art. And I said, I don't think I'm worthy of that. Not yet. And he said, well, you probably are not. So just apply, apply, and there's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
So back in fact, 95, I had finished my master's in another discipline and said, if I can make that kind of commitment, I'm going to apply. And so I applied. The process is pretty lengthy. Letters of recommendation from character and professional.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted 4 of each total at that point, and sample of your portfolio, and to make sure that you would be a benefit to the program because it is such an honor.
So how long does that take about?
Mine took about 9 months, 8 to 9 months. Yes.
That's a long time. And so are there rules and regulations once you get started?
Oh, there's a lot. One arm down the other and up. But some of the key points is respect the gallery and respect the work. So there are rules around that. And then to make sure that that replica isn't going to replace the original work.
Yeah, so
So there's size restrictions.
okay, what's the, what?
40-inch
Okay.
is the maximum capacity unless you get special permission. And I don't know what those arrangements are. And it has to be 2 inches larger or smaller than the original.
Okay.
So no matter how large the original is, in my case, I want to replicate as closely as I possibly can as the original. So I will scale down to that 40-inch capacity for my actual copy.
Okay. And then I put a slide of some of the other sort of things you need to do, right?
yes.
So they stamp the back of your canvas, right?
Right, so there's,
It's in no less than like 8 places. You get this copy from the National Gallery of Art. Copy, 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 copy.
it has a unique number. So that number is for this
This,
painting
no, that's your
only.
size. Here, maybe?
What is it, 7620.
Okay.
So that's identified with the permit, as you can see with the red top
And
there.
it gets signed every time you check in, check out?
Once a month, once
Oh,
a
okay.
month, it has to be updated.
And so how often do you come here?
Weekly, now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was bi-weekly because as a former federal employee, every other Friday, it was my flex day, so I was able to come down.
And you talked about a mentor who
Yes.
got you started in this. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
So Gerald King, he was a character, still is a character. But he had copied about 5 years before he introduced me to copying. And he said, I can't help you at all because another copyist can't provide the letters of recommendation.
Oh, okay.
So it has to be someone completely out of that circle. So he kind of followed up and said, are you going to do this? And I said, I'm going to try. So that 9-month wait, I kind of just discounted that I would be a possible copyist. But when it happened, I was really surprised. And from that point on, he says, okay, so he really kind of put me to the grindstone. He says, he'd come around periodically and look at my work and say, that's making it. But few words. It would just let me go and make my mistakes.
So he really was a mentor. I mean,
He-
were you
he
taking
really
classes
became-
with him formally or?
I had in community college
Okay.
and didn't like him. He was
Problems with authority, perhaps?
no, he was
No.
he was extremely challenging.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
Uh-huh.
Very demanding, and he expected the best from his students. So if you come late to class and there's a model, you get a demerit. If you don't come to the National Gallery and do that portfolio review and research, you get a demerit. So I wasn't ready for that at that age.
Yeah.
But I stepped up to the plate when I started to copy.
And he came to visit you. I mean, you were working in the galleries at the
Yes.
same time.
Yes. So we decided we were Friday copyists.
Okay. So you come
And
every Friday. Well,
We would come, most Fridays. So again, going back to the program, there are probably 36 copyists, and the registrar's office would know for sure. And they stagger us over the work week. So Monday through Fridays, for the hours of the gallery, 10 in the morning, and then by 4, we should be off the floor,
Okay.
prepared for the closure at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
And there's about 36 of us. And very recently, within the last year, I wouldn't know who the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday copyists were, but we kind of collaborated and come up with a small group
Oh,
called
nice.
the Master Art Copyist.
Okay.
And so we formed this little group so that we can, I don't know, collaborate and actually maybe start marketing our work, promoting our work as a group or individually sharing ideas and concepts of.
So we were talking before we sort of got started that you were saying that you feel like today there is, I don't know if you used the word stigma, or there's something about, well, you were talking about marketing copies and how do you
Yes.
market a copy, because for today's public that somehow feels like it's not maybe an authentic pursuit. I mean, when in fact this is historically the mark of how you become an artist, right? This copying is such an important part of the history of art and the history of artists. So do you feel like there's a tension between that history and today, or?
Well, I'd say probably 85 to 90% in my case, when they request for competitions, that they're original works.
Okay, so you get excluded from
So,
things.
yeah, many times we're excluded from the mainstream
Yeah.
competition.
Yeah.
But there's some organizations that appreciate that, and we're looking for those venues who appreciate the classical, the traditional,
Right.
and awakening to that this is really something that's been done from the inception of time.
Yeah.
And not just art, I mean music. We still listen to Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach, and we spend good money. Conductors are still doing those works, so it's no different from
Yeah.
music and
Yeah, that's
some of the
interesting.
other disciplines.
So one of the things that was so interesting to me, and I visited Bruce's studio a couple months ago with my daughter, and I will get back to that because he was so wonderful, is that whenever I see you copying, you always look like this. He is dressed perfectly, and we have this fabulous Judith Leister in the collection where she's dressed in this amazing outfit, and we always say, but artists didn't really look like that when they worked. They wore kind of like smocks and, something that they could get, a little schlubby and dirty, but not Bruce. Bruce is always dressed beautifully. And then you told me a story about that, which is,
So when I first started, I was still really working for the federal government.
Yeah.
I mean, my day job. And so every other Friday, I was able to copy, most Fridays. But then those off Fridays, and I'm like, but I could still come here. So I would come to work, include my lunch and a couple of hours of leave, and leave my office, which is several blocks away, and sometimes more than a few blocks away, but always downtown, to come here and copy for 2 or 3 hours. And so I still have on my work uniform and and then go back to work and finish my work day.
because you were so dedicated. I mean, I love that. So your portfolio is extensive. You've done British, you've done American, you've done Italian, you've done French, you've done Dutch, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. Here are just some of the examples, and of course, surrounded by more here too. How do you select what you work on?
First, it's not academically decided. Usually what catches my eye, there's some beauty in that painting. Sometimes the subject matter, depending. So if we go around here, the most recent, the Van Alts, was selected because I wanted to do feathers and fur. And I'm approached by people, do you do pets and animals? And
Is it only dead ones?
not quite. Well, I hadn't done that yet.
yeah.
So now I'm thinking I'm filling my toolbox with feathers
Oh.
and fur.
Interesting.
So if I get a commission to do Fluffy or
Yeah.
or Bugs, or the Easter Bunny, I'll be able to somewhat capture it.
Okay.
And I had looked at that earlier, but it's interesting because I don't think maybe I was ready for this caliber of work even a decade ago.
Really? Why?
So building the portfolio and the confidence and doing other works before I challenged myself personally
Okay.
to something I would consider a lot more challenging.
Okay.
So with 100+ hours, and I suspect another 20, 25 hours on this painting, which we equate to maybe 4 weeks or so,
Uh-huh.
I think I may have turned the corner and prepared to put copy after, and then my own personal signature.
This was the first work you did,
That's
right?
correct.
The Basile, which is a pretty well-known painting, so no pressure. You just you just jumped in. What's your process like when you do
Well, first, the selection process is
Yeah.
an African American or African woman in a very
Okay.
positive vein, and it just draw me to the subject matter.
that? Mm-hmm.
So that was the main thing. But again, once you start copying and realizing, there's colors in here, and there's palette, and there's composition, and the way I attack it is problem solving, and there's a solution out there somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's where I gain the patience. I just take my time, and typically a painting is complicated enough that you can work various areas
Mm-hmm.
and come back to that kind of anew the next week or maybe later that day
Yeah.
to work on the flowers, the bouquet there, the positioning of the figure. And every copy I've done has been very, very challenging.
I'm sure. What was the most challenging part of this one?
Getting that tilt in her head,
Really?
for me, I think most artists will probably agree that getting a likeness of a flower,
Yeah.
you can get away with that. Mountains, you can kind of get away with that. Forest, those kind of things.
Yeah, but a person to
people,
sort of endow them with the
right,
spirit, right, of
right.
the actual
The
of
eyes
life.
have to be on the same plane, and that angular has to be. So it's interesting. If I had to do this all over again, I'd probably knock it out of the park. But
I know. I
I'm,
remember you said to me that you're not
but-
pleased with this one anymore. 25 years old now.
But again, it's a learning process,
Yeah.
and I added it to my portfolio.
So what do you feel like we would do differently here,
My whole approach.
starting from
like
where you start,
The
or
negative,
laying in the
looking at the
colors?
negative space and just putting in those big areas and those big shapes. So when I look at this, it's almost like a bow tie the bouquet is making and the way it flows, to make sure I had that accurate before I'm concerned about individual groups, like the white section on the right there. That's a long oval shape, and it makes a separate shape. And I can see that now, where when I was looking at it originally, I didn't quite see it and break it down into simplifying and demystifying with those basic shapes, and not looking at it as a person, place, or thing, or not even as a color or pigment, but just light and dark shapes.
Interesting. So once you've identified a work of art, can you tell me a little bit more about your process?
So
I mean, do you sketch, for example? Do you do drawing studies before you?
I've never done that.
Okay.
Never any
Even
academic.
though that's what Gerald thought was your biggest promise, was your drawings?
Well, we are
Yeah.
drawing with paint.
Yeah.
So versus a grid or a charcoal, which I could do. Why put another medium when I can use a palette knife and do huge spaces, and likewise to draw with the paint. So again, this process was earlier on, but you can see I'm actually drawing individual shapes and almost personalities before I get that big picture and looking at the entire composition, where it kind of folds down, this huge oval that brings up the entire composition, as you can kind of see from as it progresses. And I think in this particular painting, I didn't even realize, but there are over 24 portraits. And I think we'll see the final
Here, we got another.
in the original. So if you include the horse and the cherubs,
Oh, here, I've got
and
the
so-
the final. And the original is always on the left, and then Bruce's copy will be on the right.
so if we start clockwise, the horsemen, and then the soldiers, and then you've got the cherubs, and then in the center there is a lion, the knocker, and another cherub, and then the person carrying the bread, and then you wind your way around, and it kind of zigzags. But there's over, 24 portraits alone.
So there's a
in this
lot of
composition.
individuation that you have to sort
Right,
of be
break
thinking
down.
about. Yeah. Is this the most amount of figures you've done in a work?
And a copy, yes, but not in my own personal works.
Okay. Okay. So no preparatory drawings, just brush to canvas. There must be a wonderful sense of immediacy in that kind of approach, the troubleshooting that just sort of go. I don't know. I mean, do you think that have you ever thought about trying to sketch it out first? Or, I mean,
At this point, probably not.
yeah.
And again, I don't go back to the drawing board and do anything before I'm in front of that painting, right down to researching what pigments they used or...
So you do research before,
I don't, that's my point.
Oh, you don't,
Yeah, I
sorry,
go
you
in
don't.
completely
you go
blind.
completely blind.
Blind. Well, when you think about a 500-year-old painting, what were the pigments they used? And even if we knew the color, how do we match those up 500 years later, 400 years later?
That's one of the hardest jobs, I think, of our conservation department.
I never thought about that. Yeah. How do you match these colors? And then sometimes in the conservation department, it's a reversal. They're taking off layers of varnish. They're cleaning it. And so there's this balancing act where I'm going in with a blank canvas, typically linen at this point, and just putting pigment down and then working it from that point through the kind of a step-by-step, but not a Bob Ross approach where
Yeah.
I'm working the whole canvas the entire time.
Yeah, you're not working on the happy little trees.
Not yet.
Okay.
Or smiley little face.
Yeah,
or-
smiley little face, yeah. So I thought we could look at some of the examples of your work that you found particularly compelling for you, that either had a really good story behind them, a work that you found particularly challenging. I know you said that this was one of the most difficult works
Yes.
that you ever did. This is Raphael's Alba Madonna, another sleeper of the National Gallery. So again, no pressure. Tell me about this project.
So again, I had admired that painting for years, but not from a standpoint that I would be able to copy it. And again, not thinking my skills were at that level, building that toolbox with other paintings and just a blind leap of faith said, I'm going to do it.
So how many years into the copy program before you started the
So
Alba Madonna?
Probably well over a dozen years.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe even a little bit longer than that. About 15 years, I think it was.
15 years, okay.
15 years. Now, there's a couple of factors. Going back to the rules and regulations, the availability of the painting is critical. So if that painting is in a gallery that's going to be renovated with new scaffolding or new hanging devices or just ceiling renovations.
Yeah, we had that big deep clean a couple summers ago that would close down the galleries for 12 weeks at a time.
So the research of the registrar's office is really intense. Collaborating with the curatorial staff and others, that is this gallery going to be available and the work going to be hanging? Oh, it's going to be on loan for in the next 6 months.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I don't think I'm going to finish it in 6 months. So all those factor in. So the gallery was prepared, and even at that, they in the registrar's office request that you have 4 to 5 copies that you're interested in,
Oh, okay.
so that if your first, second, even third choice is not available,
Yeah.
you can
Got
have
something to
another
work on,
selection.
yeah.
Yes. And even with that tedious research and background, there's still been a couple where I've been midstream and the gallery has been closed or the painting has been taken down or moved.
Yeah.
So, but usually they come back again.
Yeah,
So
I hope so.
I'm able to, well, versus storage.
Yeah,
They
that's
go
true.
into
Yeah,
storage
versus
for
storage,
35, 40 years. And first it's round.
Mm-hmm.
And so could I start off with a round canvas? Probably not. So it's a panel. Another close colleague helped me to make this 40-inch round. And I was saying, so now are we going to cut it out? And he said it's going to roll. I said, okay. So putting it in this square panel.
Yeah.
And so it was anchored, but then realizing that circle. So standing back and looking at this composition and saying, you know what? And then listen to some of the docents and the curators, and the whole canvas is anchored with that triangular shape,
Right.
which you can
Right.
see there. So capturing that and just getting pigment onto the, in fact, that's a wood panel. So I think you'd already mentioned, but the original painting was on wood panel, and apparently 400 years later, or almost 400 years later, that wood panel was starting to warp And so it was transferred to canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another dilemma. How close are those colors to the original, and how much restoration work went into it?
So this is sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but that's something that I thought about is, you're doing your best to get to what you see in the galleries, but sometimes what you see in the galleries isn't always what the artist did, right? And with the Van Alst in particular, there was some colleagues did a pigment study a couple of years ago and discovered that the blue game bag would have been green, and it has to do with the yellow pigment fading. And I said that to you, and you were like, "I'm not doing green."
Not doing green. I don't see green.
Which I think is fine, but there is that difference, right? Of what you're working to see, which is maybe not what was always,
Exactly. And that's another real good point. I actually talked with some folks in the education department, and they had 4 different prints of the album Madonna, and every single one of them were different. And we're talking high quality, high resolution photographs, but they were all slightly different. So even with the best photograph of that painting with green,
Yeah.
What would my pigments reflect?
No, you shouldn't
So-
do green, but
So no green, but trying to match that blue was just a huge challenge. I actually went online. I got an ultramarine blue. That was supposed to have been what the artist used, Raphael, and I think it cost me, it was the most expensive tube of paint. It was $68, and it didn't even come close
yeah.
to matching.
So what do you do in that case? You just
I
keep trying.
sent it back.
Excuse me, this is not Raphael blue. Yeah.
And I mixed maybe
Yeah.
15 different blues, this concoction of, cobalt, and 3 different ultramarine blues that I had, and
Yeah.
Prussian, and you name it. And it was starting to get just a little semblance. So ironically, my painting, and you'll see most of these, my images compared to the original are pretty different. It has a lot to do, I'm not a professional photographer, and usually I'll take those pictures myself, but my goal is to be as close to that original with the restricted lighting when I'm copying. The light source is usually really poor because the original work is under spotlights, and where my easel is set up is a far cry from any direct spotlight. So that becomes a challenge. My goal is to get as close to the original as I possibly can,
Yeah.
color-wise and all aspects, textures and all those other great things. So then the other challenge is the importance of the background, which are literally 3 cities. So they're on 3 different planes, and there's figures back there, and there's folks on horseback, if you can point in the
looking at-
background, yeah.
Right in here.
There's a couple with having a lunch under that first layer of tree line. And then the community on this side, that's before the little lake, and then in the far background, up in the mountains, there's another.
Right back there.
And then all of that needs to go in before the cross or any of those things that are in the foreground. So trying to get all of that detail in, which typically is never going to be seen in the first.
Yeah.
But I'm anal about this, so,
Yeah.
okay, I can't just stop that rooftop because
Yeah.
there's a hand behind it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so then working my way to the foreground. So the background, making sure that was in place before I really even focus on any of the foreground figures. And then the mid-background, which would be that mountain range. There's something at the top of that mountain range on the right there. Do you see the buildings up there?
Up here?
Very top, yes.
Yeah.
So all those go in, once the sky is, and then working my way into the next plane, which is be the mid-ground, but far mid-ground, then the near mid-ground, and then the near foreground, and the placement of the figures, where I put a placeholder, but then working toward the actual foreground. So yeah, it's
Well, are you pleased with how this one turned out, or would you do this
I'm
one
getting
over
there.
2?
I'm getting there. The real test is when I cut out the find the Tundo frame and cut it out and actually frame it.
Because you frame each of yours really, as carefully as you can. I mean, that's
thank
what's so
you.
wonderful about having these all here today, is to see just how much attention you pay to it throughout its whole sort of process.
Well, it's like getting dressed in a tuxedo and you wear a pair of tennis shoes.
Yeah.
And if I exhibit,
Yeah.
I'm prepared. I'll hit the ground running because those
Yes.
works are
Yeah.
framed.
Yeah.
They're expensive, but again, who knows what
Yeah.
the future has to hold. And
Well, when I came to your studio a few weeks ago, we talked about a couple others, like your Thomas Moran, for example. And you said that this was also one of your favorites, right?
yes,
Why?
the painting struck me. It was late in the day, and I was looking for a new painting. And I'd seen this before, but that particular afternoon, it was in the summer, the way the light, even though it's filtered, was coming into that room, I'm like, wow. I said, I wonder if I'm ready for this one. And I said, probably not, because this painting, I forget the dimensions, but I think it's 6 foot across. It's pretty
It's
long.
not small.
So scaling it down, reducing this to something that's manageable. And I said, it's really going to look bizarre, because the proportional relationship brought it down to 40-inch, and then the scalable would be 16 inches. And I said, let me try it. So, blind leap of faith again, I attacked it, and not realizing the whole thing as the Dawsons come through the gallery with their tours. Each one has these little nuggets of information. They're all consistent, yet there's something new that I hear about. And that this painting was actually an afterthought. I think he did it, if I'm not mistaken, for the railroad. So this scene had been long past. There were no more Native Americans, and it was a depot. And they're trying to market the railroad lines to head west.
So you
westward.
don't know too many of the stories behind the paintings before you do them. I mean, you sort of absorb the stories as you work through the docents or I guess
curator,
curators. that
yes.
come, yeah, some of those people too.
A lot of
Does
those
that
people-
enliven the
Oh,
paintings
sure,
for you?
sure. Because I'm
How?
not approaching it. They are sharing,
Yeah.
for the general public.
Does it, and if so, how ever inform how you paint?
Typically, it hasn't.
Okay.
I'm not gonna put green in that.
I swear I'm not pushing for it. Okay.
So all that valuable information is probably for naught.
Okay, fine. Another favorite of yours, you said, was The Constant, right? The favorite
Yes.
of Diamir.
I'm seeing a trend here. So it's these massive paintings.
Yeah, you don't go
that have
small.
to scale.
Yeah, you
that have to be scaled
keep
down.
saying, and then I got up the confidence, but it seems like everything you pick is enormous.
So yeah, I'm gonna have to maybe talk to the registrar's office about maybe scaling up
Scaling
just
up,
a,
yeah. you get
just a little bit.
all he wants
not
is
to
60
overextend
inches,
my,
yeah.
So it's interesting that this painting was originally owned by the Naval Academy in
Oh, I didn't know
Annapolis. And so it was, as beautiful as it is, it's off limits to copying because it's not the ownership issue. And so about definitely less than a decade ago, apparently there was some workings, a gentleman's agreement, legal,
Okay.
whatever, staff, that the National Gallery took possession of this work. And then it was available
you
to
got the thumbs up.
copy.
Yeah, we have a number of long-term loans here. I mean, I don't know the exact story of this one myself, but we have a number of long-term loans in our collection. We have something from Catholic University. We have something from the Smithsonian in Northern Baroque paintings too, because they're just not, I mean, I have a hard time imagining this at the Naval Observatory, but they just aren't, they're not well equipped
Right,
sometimes.
well, and
to
that's
hit-
why,
exactly, to
exactly,
have these,
space
that someone has
constraints.
given them a painting and they're not exactly
Or
sure
given
what
it the
to do.
respect that it deserves.
Yeah.
This is a very, very handsome painting.
Oh, yeah.
So scaling it down. In fact, another tidbit about this, the frames, which you mentioned earlier, there's a research team from the National Gallery who's researching this frame, just the frame.
Oh.
And if you can see, it's written in Arabic.
Oh.
And so there's been guests who come in and they're reading this and then come to find out some of the NGA staff are actually researching that frame
Wonderful.
to get more information. And they don't think that was the original frame
Okay.
of the artist.
Okay.
that
Yeah.
that has been changed
I think
over the
a
years,
lot of the things have been, reframed, of course, because
which is an interesting
well, yeah, it just has to do with the
added.
history of taste, right, and what people want to see around their objects over the years. I think this is a beautiful painting, but it now has a special place in my heart because when we came to your studio, my 4-year-old daughter and she just I mean, she loved Mr. Bruce, first off. Mr. Bruce, Mr. Bruce. And I said, no, Mr. Bruce, I like this one. Mr. Bruce, I like this one. But she loved this one. And you were just so sweet with her and so gentle, and you gave her, your attention and said, well, what do you like about this one? And did you notice that there's a little person over here? And you really you really engaged her. And it just strikes me that to be a copyist, you not only have to be an artist, but you have to be a people person because you are working in front of our public constantly.
That's why
And they're asking you questions, and they're just,
and again, I look at it as a blessing, seriously, that one of the guards some years back said, Mr. Campbell, you're an international artist. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, no, he says, there were some guests earlier. They were in plain clothes, but we got a report. They had their own entourage, and they were visiting from some country. And he said, you're going home with them as part of their formal visit to the U.S., to Washington, D.C., in the National Gallery in pictures. And he said, you were talking to them and you engaged them.
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of second nature to me.
Yeah.
But it is an honor to be here and to engage complete strangers who don't remain strangers after a while.
Yeah.
They'll email me. And then, again, your daughter just represents the students who this may be the first and maybe the only time they'll come to a museum and see a living artist. So if it sparks something in them to continue in any of the arts, it could be music, it could be anything, because art, the visual arts, reflects everything. You'll see it in every painting, every discipline, every genre in the visual arts. So engaging, and then I've got plenty of practice because I got 5 of those critters. So I'm kind of used, and I'm the oldest of 8.
Oh my gosh.
So I've been around kids quite a bit.
Well, and then your atelier, right? You have students.
Yes,
you have
yes.
a whole host of people asking for your attention.
I welcome it. I welcome it.
Well, we're so lucky to have you because, I would say that you probably speak to more people about Von Alst on any given Friday than I do. I mean, the copyists are the ambassadors of the collection in a lot of ways. And you've engaged with the museum on other levels too, right? You've participated in educational programs here. It's not just people interrupting you at work, but actually.
Right, for a short period. I might reconsider that.
Yeah.
Art Around the Corner.
Right around the corner.
Yeah.
Mhm. Can you tell us about that?
For young students, I think they're from the metropolitan Washington area, and it's a beautiful program. It's all fully funded by the National Gallery of Art, and it's a week-long program, educational endeavors for the children, and one small part of it is to meet a living artist. And so as a copyist, they come in and we talk about basic shapes and about being an artist. And it was so cute. It was really amazing. One of the times I forget the name of the school, but one little girl, she came up with her drawing and said, Mr. Campbell, could you autograph my drawing? And I was like, sure. And then I look, and there's like 35 little.
Stop. Oh, that's so great. They lined up for you.
Can you autograph my
Aw.
picture? And I said, sure, but wasn't expecting that, So
Sweet.
when you open Pandora's box,
Well, you're a celebrity in many
I
of
wouldn't
our
go
eyes.
that far.
Yeah, no,
But they
it's true.
were really entertained. And another little tidbit, there's a guy, where's he from? Kentucky? And his face looks somewhat familiar. For the last 3 years, he brings his class up, they're junior high school students. He brings them up, and one of the highlights is to come find me, hunt me down where I'm copying, and introduce his class to me.
That's so
And this is the
nice.
3rd year, and I didn't
Really?
realize it until he was here.
He said, I've seen you before. Yeah.
Right. Different kids, though. But no,
Yeah.
I didn't
From
associate it.
Kentucky.
I'm almost sure he was from Kentucky. So meeting people
Wow.
from all over the world, and especially from coast to coast, and Hawaii and Alaska and parts
That's wonderful.
north and south. So really, that ambassador, I don't know if I'm worthy, but I feel like I'm kind of not involved with the National Gallery as a staff member, but having that
We are
opportunity
very
to do
much a
this.
part of our community. I mean, all the copyists are. I mean, we feel so lucky to have so many wonderful people talking to the public. I mean, it's just, it's a highlight for me to go walk through the galleries to see you all at work too. And Sarah's right. I've absolutely admired your work for a very long time. So it was
See, I
so.
wouldn't have known
I
that.
know. I'm just one of the creepers watching you. Is there anything on the horizon right now? Once the Von Alst is done, that you've got your eye on?
A couple. I think I'm done with still lives for a minute.
Yeah. You've done the fluffy. You've done the feathers.
But I'm still kind of looking at maybe a pastoral or something
Okay.
exterior.
Okay.
Portrait, maybe it's time for another portrait. I'm not really sure. It'll be availability and then kind of,
Mm-hmm.
and then with those 3 or 4, go to the registrar's office and see what's available.
Okay.
But I'm sure, so maybe by beginning of spring or Easter,
Okay.
I'll be ready to hunt down my next victim.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to do another Dutch or Flemish thing, you just let me know. 'Cause
Northern
I
Baroque,
got
yes.
ideas. If anyone out there wants to see you on More Than Just Fridays, where can they find you? Are you showing anywhere right now?
I am in a very local show in Laurel, Maryland. It's at the Montpelier Mansion. And so it's a competition, so I was selected for that, and that's a month-long show. I teach a couple of places, so Stone Branch School of Art, and that's in Rockville. And so I do a painting class there, painting like the Hudson River School.
Okay.
And I see at least one of my students out in the audience.
Okay.
So that's a wonderful venue. And the school is wonderful because it really is a preparatory for arts. So many of the public school systems have eliminated fine arts from their curriculums. And so this school actually from, I think, as young as 5 years old,
Yeah.
from 5 to 85, if you're willing to learn some type of art, which includes printmaking and seamstry and fashion and sculpture and you name it. So I've kind of honed in on the drawing with paint
Mm-hmm.
and landscapes. I also run an open studio. In fact, Joel King's former studio, Atelier Royal, in Riverdale, Maryland, and that's an open studio, and it's open to the public. And I run the it's a figure drawing, live model on a weekly basis. I've become a member of the Arts Club of Washington, so
Oh, congratulations.
thank you. So it was it's very competitive. You don't have to be a member, but I'm going to be exhibiting in the March of 2020.
Okay.
So preparing
Okay.
for that, and a couple of commissions. So
All right.
and my website
you're
and
busy.
others.
You're
I try
busy.
to.
Well, thank you so much again, and we invite you to come up and see some of Bruce's work. Thank you for coming.